In this section, I am discussing event basics. There will be 3 relative questions to this topic. There is a lot you need to know about event handling, like the event object, mouse and keyboard events, UI events, other DOM events, or even creating and dispatching custom events. I will start with fundamentals first and then move into more advanced levels with more sections on events. Events are various types of actions on which you can run your desired code. For example, you have a button like this. You want that when the user of this page clicks on a button, it should display a message. Right now, what I have designed is there are 4 buttons, and I am showing you that there are 4 different ways to write an event. So let's look at the code first. The output which you saw just now, these are the 4 different buttons I have taken. The first button is the inline way. It means that you can write an event like this, where I can say on click equal to sign and then the code which you want to execute. So for example, instead of writing a separate function, you can write the code straight away here. The second way is that you write the code by calling a function. So let me just call a function here. I will say function show message, and here I am going to say alert, the common way. This is the most common way we bind the event, so I'll say the common way. There are 2 more buttons, but that I am explaining at a later stage. So now with these 2 buttons, let me just go to the output. I'll refresh the screen. Now for these buttons, there is no code written, but when I click on the first button, it displays an alert. I have already written that this is not an ideal way. So this is the code which you see. This way of writing the code is not advisable. The second, the most common way is this one, where I have the button, but when you click on the common way, you see that the alert is displayed. So the function is called on click of the button. There are 2 more ways through which you can bind an event. So let's first of all write code for this button, that is binding event at a later stage. That is again a very easier way. The important thing here is that you have to have an ID for that button. So let's say I have taken an ID already. So btn is the ID name. What I'll do, I'll take one object here. I'll name btn or whatever you want to keep it. And there I will use the get element by ID. Now I'm going to bind the event. So what I will do, I will say btn dot on click is equal to, now here you can write a function name. Let's say show message. Instead of that, you can also write an anonymous function. I can say function like this. I don't give a name to the function. That's also fine. Now here in the alert, I will display some message saying that event bound later on, like this. So this is another way where you have to have an ID of a button or whichever element you are using, and then you assign a function by giving the event name here. Let's try this as well. I'll just refresh the page, click on this button. So now you see that event bound later on. This code is executed. And the last way which I want to show you is using the add event listener method. Now this is a kind of method which we have already seen in one of the discussion of event bubbling and capturing, but let's also try so that you get clear with that. So again, the condition with the add event listener is similar. We need to have an ID of the button. So let's say for this btn1, I'm going to add the code. I will say const btn1 is equal to document dot get element by ID. The element is the btn1. Here I am going to say btn1 dot add event listener. Now remember that when you are writing an event, the actual event is click event. On click is the handler given to the HTML. So here we write the core event name. So I'm going to say click here because I want that when that button is clicked, I want to execute something. So on the click event, which function I want to call? Let's say I'm going to call btn1 click. That's the function I want to create. There is also one more parameter while using the add event listener method. That is the true or false. So by default, it is false. That means it is the bubbling phase. But if you want to change it from bubbling to capturing, then you keep it true. in case if you do not want to deal with bubbling and capturing, right? So by default anyway it will be bubbling, which we have already discussed in previous sections. So just to remind you about that, right now we don't need anything about bubbling or capturing. So I'm going to keep only 2 parameters, but that also means that by default this thing is now false. The next thing is we have finished the event binding. Now btn one click, there is no such function, so let's create that also. I'll say btn one clicked, that's the function. And when this button is clicked, I just want to display alert. I'll say add event listener clicked, something like this. So now we refresh the page, and here I'm going to click the button to display the message. So there are 4 ways we have seen in this code where we are trying to attach the event. Remember, the first way which I have mentioned, that is the inline way, is not something you should practice. So better that you go with this common way. You can also go with the event listener or even this one, that doesn't matter. But generally you see that we write the event in this way only, or sometimes add event listener because you want to change the phase, that is from bubbling to capturing, then you can certainly use the add event listener method syntax as well. So this is how a simple event can be attached. Now there is one more thing which also we have discussed in one of our previous section, that there is something called event object. The event object is the parent object of all event objects. Event objects like mouse event, keyboard event, focus event, touch event, UI event, and many others. The event object gives you access to the various properties and methods. We have already seen few in the bubbling and capturing section. For example, method like stop propagation or a property like event.target. Let's practically try working on it here in this example as well one more time. Let me just remove the additional code. So I'm going to remove this button. I'll keep this show message as it is because we don't need any other coding at the moment, and the show message function will also be there. That's it. So now this is a more precise way. Here I just want to display the value of the event object. I also want to, let's say instead of alert, now I'm going to use console log, and I will also use one more property of event. Let's say event.type. Let me just refresh this. Now we have just one button, which is the common way. Now I'll click on the button. So now if you see the output of console log event, this is the type of event which is displayed. And if I just expand this, you will see that there are various parameters. This shows that whether alter key is enabled, pressed or not. Is the bubbling true or false? So bubbling is true by default, right? So you can also write event.bubbles. You can write that. So you will get this parameter. And if you use add event listener, then you can change this from bubbles, that is true, to false. You can do that. The buttons are all about which button was pressed. So this anyway we are going to discuss in the next section when we go deeper into mouse events. But just I want to discuss here that these are the various properties you have of event object, and because event is the parent object, mouse event also has access to all the properties of event object as well. Also, you see that when I display the event.type, it displays that it is the click event. So the event object gives you lot of information about the event. Let's say which element actually raised this event. If we want to get that, you can say console log. At the moment I'm saying, I'll say event.target. So let me save this and refresh the page. So this is the button which actually raised this event, right? So this is the target. So when you say event.target, you actually refer this HTML element. So event object is really very useful. Sometimes if this function is not in the same scope, then you can pass the event object like this. You can say event here. Now that goes to some other function. So I'll say maybe obj or something. And then if I try to display obj, for example, let's say obj.type and obj.target. So it's the same thing. So let me refresh the page. I'll just click the button and you see the same output here. So in this section, I have discussed just a very basic idea about events. Now we will explore events in detail. Next section, I'm focusing more on mouse event, where we will see the click, double click, mouse move, mouse over, and various other mouse related events. Now let's discuss few relative questions of this topic. The first question is, explain various ways of configuring an event with HTML elements. So these are the 4 different ways we have seen we can use to bind an event. The second question is, explain syntax of add event listener method. So the add event listener method syntax is like this, that we have the event name, we also have the function which you want to call, and the third one is optional, which decides whether you want to go with bubbling or capturing. Generally by default it is bubbling, so in case if you want that it should be capturing phase when the event is propagated, then only you will use this parameter. The third question is, what is an event object? So event object is something which is actually propagated whenever there is an event is generated, and event object gives you various properties which you can access. You have details of the event as well as the element which raised the event. So event object is the parent object to handle all types of events.